Hi, welcome to my channel, and welcome to the intro video for the Frankenstein Read Aloud. In this introduction video, I'm first going to introduce Frankenstein and briefly speak on Mary Shelley, giving context for how Frankenstein was conceived and potential influences from her early life. I will then talk about the structure of this Read Aloud series and what you can expect over the next few weeks. And by few weeks, I mean 8 to 10. Finally, we will dive in and I will read Mary Shelley's personal introduction to the 1831 text, as well as the original introduction that was written by Percy Shelley for the 1818 anonymously published edition. Frankenstein is one of those stories that has a life of its own. It haunts our cultural and intellectual mythos. Even people who have never read the original novel or seen any of the film adaptations can at least give you the general gist. It's about a scientist who created a man from sewn together bits and animated it. We know a Frankenstein Halloween costume when we see one. When asked to do a Frankenstein walk, we'll put our arms out and walk stiffly, as if in a body and discovering joints for the first time. We've recognized these gestures and visuals instantly. It's a part of our shared storytelling language, so I knew I had to finally sit down and read the original for myself. And what I found was a beautiful and devastating story about personal responsibility and our desire for companionship. At its core, Mary Shelley asks, are monsters born or made? Mary Shelley was the daughter of two prominent writers, William Godwin and Mary Wollstonecraft. Mary Wollstonecraft wrote the famous Vindication of the Rights of Women, and William Godwin was a prolific political philosopher. Mary never knew her mother, as her mother died 10 days after Mary's birth from the unwashed hands of the physician who removed the afterbirth from her uterus. Remember to pour one out for germ theory and hand washing. Mary met Percy Shelley either in 1812 or 1814 when he was seeking a sort of surrogate father in William Godwin, whom he greatly admired. He had been expelled from Oxford for his atheism and disowned by his own father. He was already married to Harriet Westbrook and was having a child with her when he met Mary. Their courtship was quick and dirty, and they often rendezvoused at the grave of Mary's mother. You can imagine what they did there because Mary was pregnant when they ran away together to Europe, and this created a rift between Mary and her father that lasted over 2 years. Probably not the pregnant out of wedlock thing because Mary's own mother was pregnant out of wedlock, but maybe the running away, maybe the fact that Percy was older, maybe the fact that he was already married. You know, there's a lot of things it could have been. So Mary had already given birth to 2 children by the summer of 1816, which is when Frankenstein was conceived, the first of which died several days after birth. The second was less than 6 months old when Frankenstein was conceived. The story of how Frankenstein came to be is also quite famous. It's incredibly theatrical. It adds to the mythos of the piece itself, a romantic backdrop that sets the scene for the tale perfectly. I won't go too deeply into detail, as it's mentioned in both prefaces that we're going to read a little bit later on in the video, but I'll summarize. In the summer of 1816, Mary Shelley, still Godwin at the time, Percy Shelley, and Mary's half-sister Claire Clairmont went to stay with Lord Byron during his self-proclaimed exile in the Swiss Alps at Villa Diodati. Claire was pregnant by Lord Byron at the time, but he had grown bored of her. Also staying there was John Polidori, a friend and physician of Byron's. It was known as the Year Without a Summer due to an eruption from Mount Tambora in modern-day Indonesia in April of 1815 that created a global cooling event and unfavorable weather conditions. So they were confined indoors much of the time and got their hands on a book of ghost stories. One night, Lord Byron challenged them all to write their own ghost story. Only Mary and Polidori succeeded. Mary producing Frankenstein, and Polidori writing The Vampire. Though the timeline for The Vampire is a bit elusive, as neither Mary nor Percy's intro mentions another completed story from the group during that summer. Indeed, early in its publication, The Vampire was attributed to Lord Byron himself, but Polidori later clarified that while the story was inspired by one of Lord Byron's that he heard in the summer of 1816, it was not written by him. In the same way that a lot of people think that Frankenstein is partially inspired by or about Lord Byron, people said the same thing about The Vampire. Maybe it was. I don't know. Obviously, none of it has been confirmed, and we can only assume. But needless to say, Lord Byron was a personality. And the whole Villa Diodati group kind of gives a weird goth nepo baby polycule type situation. It's not historically founded that they were all sleeping together, but that's kind of the energy it gives. And there was a lot of speculation that Claire Clairmont, Mary's half-sister, had slept with Percy before. So I don't think it's that crazy to think that everyone was kind of sipping out of each other's drinks, if you know what I'm saying. Again, none of that is historically founded or historically sound. It's just conjecture. It is me looking at the dramaturgy packet and making inferences. During the year and change that Mary was writing Frankenstein, her half-sister commits suicide, Percy's first wife is found dead, her and Percy marry, Mary and Percy publish a romantic travel narrative called History of a 6 Weeks Tour, and she becomes pregnant with their third child. An eventful year, I would say. Frankenstein was published in 1818 anonymously, as science fiction was not really a respected or serious genre at the time, and the original preface by Shelley kind of aims to assert its own seriousness by drawing comparisons to science, nature, and other great works of literary renown, which you'll see when we read it. I won't say too much more about the rest of Mary's life. I'll save that for the conclusion, but already in her young years, she has experienced pregnancy and profound loss. The themes of motherhood, fatherhood, and parenthood in general were certainly on her mind, as well as the behaviors of her male companions, aka Percy and Lord Byron, and maybe their treatment of their lovers and wives were probably swirling around in there. This Read Aloud series is meant to mimic read aloud time that most of us had in elementary school, when we would all gather around the teacher on a carpet or in chairs and listen to a story, and then talk about it. Of course, this one's for adults, and it'll be a bit more challenging because we're starting with Frankenstein. I'm not going to edit out any small mistakes, as I want to preserve as much of the informal in-person experience as possible, and the main reason is that I don't want to drive myself crazy when I'm editing. If you're looking for a more polished, perfect performance, there are many great audiobook versions of Frankenstein out there, even on YouTube, and I encourage you to seek those out. At the end of each section, I will summarize what we read, ask a few questions for you to reflect on, and perhaps give some of my own light commentary. While I'm reading, I will have vocab words that I found challenging to find on screen, as well as elevate any quotes that really resonated with me. I might also have some additional information or visual things happening while I'm reading. It just kind of depends on how the editing process for this goes and how much I think is needed versus trying to just let people focus on the book. This will also be a bit of a discovery process for me as well. When I first read Frankenstein alone, I read the 1831 version, which is the one I had lying around the house that I got at the thrift store. But upon researching for this video, I discovered that the 1818 version is a little bit different than the 1831 edition, in some small ways, as well as some more major thematic ways. Now, I won't spoil what I've read that the differences are. I'm gonna save that for the conclusion video. But I have decided to read the 1818 version for the first time with you all in this process. The only exception will be Mary Shelley's personal preface that she wrote for the 1831 edition. I'll read that later on in this video, like I said, after I read the original preface, as I think both give some interesting context. I divided the book into 8 sections, so there will be 10 videos total, including this intro and a conclusion video. If you would like to follow along, as I mentioned, I'm using the 1818 version of the text, which is readily available online, or you can get it from your local bookstore, or might I recommend getting it from your local library? They need us right now, and they're really important. If you would rather follow along in the 1831 version to spot the differences in real time, be my guest, that sounds fun. And I don't think it's gonna be different enough that it'll be confusing. I also wanna point out that an alternative title for Frankenstein is The Modern Prometheus. For those of you who aren't familiar, Prometheus was the Titan of forethought, and switched sides in the battle between the Titans and the Olympians for the control of the world, when the Titans wouldn't allow him to use his knack for trickery in battle. Prometheus had sympathy for humans and their weakness, and gave them the gift of fire, stolen from the workshop of Hephaestus, whatever. I was a Percy Jackson girl, and I still can't pronounce Hephaestus, question mark. Anyway, the fire given to the humans was stolen from the workshop of Hephaestus in order to help them survive the struggles of living. Zeus punished Prometheus for this crime by chaining him to a rock and having an eagle come and eat his liver every day. Yum, yum, yum. So I will leave you with that little tidbit to mull over as we read each preface. We're going to start with the original 1818 preface, written by Percy but published anonymously alongside the original text. I do want to take a quick second to admire this copy of the 1818 text that I got. Let me read a little bit from the editor's note to let you know what we're in for. The following publication of Frankenstein was created from the 1818 first edition book. It was verified page by page and mark by mark, then edited for accuracy against the drafts and later editions. The design elements, such as chapter headings, italics, and small caps, mimic those of the original, which is what I wanted. I wanted it to be as close to what people had in 1818 as possible. There is also a Paradise Lost quote that was taken out for later editions. And a little dedication to William Godwin. So I will read those as well, but I'm very excited. Did I request thee, Maker, from my clay to mold me man? Did I solicit thee from darkness to promote me? And then the dedication to William Godwin, author of Political Justice, Caleb Williams, and C. I'm sure that means like etc. These volumes are respectfully inscribed by the author. Here we go. Okay, let's dive in. Preface. The event on which this fiction is founded has been supposed by Dr. Darwin and some of the physiological writers of Germany as not of impossible occurrence. I shall not be supposed as according the remotest degree of serious faith to such an imagination. Yet, in assuming it as the basis of a work of fancy, I have not considered myself as merely weaving a series of supernatural terrors. The event on which the interest of the story depends is exempt from the disadvantages of a mere tale of specters or enchantment. It was recommended by the novelty of situations which it develops, and, however impossible as a physical fact, affords a point of view to the imagination for the delineating of human passions more comprehensive and commanding than any which the ordinary relations of existing events can yield. I have thus endeavored to preserve the truth of the elementary principles of human nature, while I have not scrupled to innovate upon their combinations. The Iliad, the tragic poetry of Greece, Shakespeare in The Tempest and Midsummer Night's Dream, and most especially Milton in Paradise Lost, conform to this rule. And the most humble novelist who seeks to confer or receive amusement from his labors may, without presumption, apply to prose fiction a license, or rather a rule, from the adoption of which so many exquisite combinations of human feeling have resulted in the highest specimens of poetry. The circumstance on which my story rests was suggested in casual conversation. It was commenced partly as a source of amusement, and partly as an expedient for exercising any untried resources of mind. Other motives were mingled with these as the work proceeded. I am by no means indifferent to the manner in which whatever moral tendencies exist in the sentiments or characters it contains shall affect the reader, yet my chief concern in this respect has been limited to the avoiding the enervating effects of the novel of the present day, and to the exhibition of the amiableness of domestic affection and the excellence of universal virtue. The opinions which naturally spring from the character and situation of the hero are by no means to be conceived as existing always in my own conviction, nor is any inference justly to be drawn from the following pages as prejudicing any philosophical doctrine of whatever kind. It is a subject also of additional interest to the author that this story was begun in the majestic region where the scene is principally laid, and in society which cannot cease to be regretted. I passed the summer of 1816 in the environs of Geneva. The season was cold and rainy, and in the evenings we crowded around a blazing wood fire, and occasionally amused ourselves with some German stories of ghosts, which happened to fall into our hands. These tales excited in us a playful desire of imitation. Two other friends, a tale from the pen of one of whom would be far more acceptable to the public than anything I can ever hope to produce, and myself, agreed to write each a story, founded on some supernatural occurrence. The weather, however, suddenly became serene, and my two friends left me on a journey among the Alps, and lost, in the magnificent scenes which they present, all memory of their ghostly visions. The following tale is the only one which has been completed. Okay. First reaction. I just have to give an unfiltered reaction to this. What the Percy? That was so hard to read and parse out. I'm sorry, it was. And if you have no idea what I just read, that's okay. I've read this like 5 times now, probably over that, in trying to actually get all the words out and record it. I know what he's saying, but damn, does he say it in a difficult manner. So what Percy is saying in that intro is that it is not purely based on fancy, that there is scientific basis and theory for Frankenstein. And Mary will go into that in her preface a little bit as well, because Lord Byron and Percy were discussing Dr. Darwin and his theories about, I don't know if I would say regeneration, animation, I suppose, creating life. So he is trying to kind of give some seriousness, as I mentioned, some seriousness and legitimacy to this story already, because it's, it's science fiction and it's not super respected like we respect it today. So he likens it to Paradise Lost and A Midsummer Night's Dream. So there's, a combination of fantasy, science, and human emotion that creates an overall truth or an overall metaphor, or prose that is worth your time, is kind of what that section is saying. And then I think it's giving a disclaimer about, like, I don't necessarily believe what the characters believe, because as you'll see, there's a lot of crazy stuff in there. And then it talks a little bit about how she wrote it in Geneva, in Switzerland, which was important, or I guess Percy says that. Percy says that it was important that, she conceived of it in the place that it's set. But what the Percy? Done with that one. Okay, on to Mary's much better written preface from the 1831 edition. The publishers of the Stanford novels, in selecting Frankenstein for one of their series, expressed a wish that I should furnish them with some account of the origin of the story. I am the more willing to comply, because I shall thus give a general answer to the question so very frequently asked me, how I, then a young girl, came to think of and to dilate upon so very hideous an idea. It is true that I am very averse to bringing myself forward in print, but as my account will only appear as an appendage to a former production, and as it will be confined to such topics as have connection with my authorship alone, I can scarcely accuse myself of a personal intrusion. It is not singular that, as the daughter of two persons of distinguished literary celebrity, I should very early in life have thought of writing. As a child, I scribbled, and my favorite pastime during the hours given me for recreation was to write stories. Still, I had a dearer pleasure than this, which was the formation of castles in the air, the indulging in waking dreams, the following up trains of thought which had for their subject the formation of a succession of imaginary incidents. My dreams were at once more fantastic and agreeable than my writings. In the latter, I was a close imitator, rather doing as others had done than putting down the suggestion of my own mind. What I wrote was intended at least for one other eye, my childhood's companion and friend, but my dreams were all my own. I accounted for them to nobody. They were my refuge when annoyed, my dearest pleasure when free. I lived principally in the country as a girl, and passed a considerable time in Scotland. I made occasional visits to the more picturesque parts, but my habitual residence was on the blank and dreary northern shores of the Tay, near Dundee. Blank and dreary on retrospection, I call them. They were not so to me then. They were the eyrie of freedom, and the pleasant region where unheeded I could commune with the creatures of my fancy. I wrote then, but in a most commonplace style. It was beneath the trees of the grounds belonging to our house, or on the bleak sides of the woodless mountain near, that my true compositions, the airy flights of my imagination, were born and fostered. I did not make myself the heroine of my tales. Life appeared to me too commonplace an affair as regarded myself. I could not figure to myself that romantic woes or wonderful events would ever be my lot, but I was not confined to my own identity, and I could people the hours with creations far more interesting to me at that age than my own sensations. After this, my life became busier, and reality stood in place of fiction. My husband, however, was, from the first, very anxious that I should prove myself worthy of my parentage, and enroll myself on the page of fame. He was forever inciting me to obtain literary reputation, which even on my own part I cared for then, though since I have become infinitely indifferent to it. At this time, he desired that I should write, not so much with the idea that I could produce anything worthy of notice, but that he might himself judge how far I possessed the promise of better things hereafter. Still, I did nothing. Traveling and the cares of a family occupied my time, and study, in the way of reading or improving my ideas in communication with his far more cultivated mind, was all of literary employment that engaged my attention. In the summer of 1816, we visited Switzerland and became the neighbors of Lord Byron. At first, we spent our pleasant hours on the lake, or wandering on its shores, and Lord Byron, who was writing the third canto of Childe Harold, was the only one among us who put his thoughts upon paper. These, as he brought them successively to us, clothed in all the light and harmony of poetry, seemed to stamp as divine the glories of heaven and earth, whose influences we partook with him. But it proved a wet, ungenial summer, and the incessant rain often confined us for days to the house. Some volumes of ghost stories, translated from the German into French, fell into our hands. There was the history of the inconstant lover, who, when he thought to clasp the bride to whom he had pledged his vows, found himself in the arms of the pale ghost of her whom he had deserted. There was the tale of the sinful founder of his race, whose miserable doom it was to bestow the kiss of death on all the younger sons of his fated house, just when they reached the age of promise. His gigantic, shadowy form, clothed like the ghost in Hamlet, in complete armor, but with the beaver up, was seen at midnight by the moon's fitful beams to advance slowly along the gloomy avenue. The shape was lost beneath the shadow of the castle walls, but soon a gate swung back, a step was heard, the door of the chamber opened, and he advanced to the couch of the blooming youths, cradled in healthy sleep. Eternal sorrow sat upon his face as he bent down and kissed the forehead of the boys, who from that hour withered like flowers snapped upon the stalk. I have not seen these stories since then, but their incidents are as fresh in my mind as if I had read them yesterday. "We will each write a ghost story," said Lord Byron, and his proposition was acceded to. There were 4 of us. The noble author began a tale, a fragment of which he printed at the end of his poem of Mazeppa. Shelley, more apt to embody ideas and sentiments in the radiance of brilliant imagery and in the music of the most melodious verse that adorns our language than to invent the machinery of a story, commenced one founded on the experience of his early life. Poor Polidori had some terrible idea about a skull-headed lady who was so punished for peeping through a keyhole. What to see, I forget. Something very shocking and wrong, of course. But when she was reduced to a worse condition than the renowned Tom of Coventry, he did not know what to do with her, and was obliged to dispatch her to the tomb of the Capulets, the only place for which she was fitted. The illustrious poets also, annoyed by the platitude of prose, speedily relinquished their uncongenial task. I busied myself to think of a story to rival those which had excited us to this task, one which would speak to the mysterious fears of our nature and awaken thrilling horror, one to make the reader dread to look around, to curdle the blood, and to quicken the beatings of the heart. If I did not accomplish these things, my ghost story would be unworthy of its name. I thought and pondered. Vainly. I felt that blank incapability of invention which is the greatest misery of authorship, when dull nothing replies to our anxious invocations. "Have you thought of a story?" I was asked each morning, and each morning I was forced to reply with a mortifying negative. Everything must have a beginning, to speak in Sanchian phrase, and that beginning must be linked to something that went before. The Hindus give the world an elephant to support it, but they make the elephant stand upon a tortoise. Invention, it must be humbly admitted, does not consist in creating out of void, but out of chaos. The materials must, in the first place, be afforded. It can give form to dark, shapeless substances, but cannot bring into being the substance itself. In all matters of discovery and invention, even of those that appertain to the imagination, we are continually reminded of the story of Columbus and his egg. Invention consists in the capacity of seizing on the capabilities of a subject, and in the power of molding and fashioning ideas suggested to it. Many and long were the conversations between Lord Byron and Shelley, to which I was a devout but nearly silent listener. During one of these, various philosophical doctrines were discussed, and among others the nature of the principle of life, and whether there was any probability of its ever being discovered and communicated. They talked of the experiments of Dr. Darwin. I speak not of what the doctor really did or said that he did, but, as more to my purpose, of what was then spoken of as having been done by him, who preserved a piece of vermicelli in a glass case, till by some extraordinary means it began to move with a voluntary motion. Not thus, after all, would life be given. Perhaps a corpse would be reanimated. Galvanism had given token of such things. Perhaps the component parts of a creature might be manufactured, brought together, and endued with vital warmth. Night waned upon this talk, and even the witching hour had gone by before we retired to rest. When I placed my head on my pillow, I did not sleep, nor could I be said to think. My imagination, unbidden, possessed and guided me, gifting the successive images that arose in my mind with a vividness far beyond the usual bounds of reverie. I saw, with shut eyes but acute mental vision, I saw the pale student of unhallowed arts kneeling beside the thing he had put together. I saw the hideous phantasm of a man stretched out, and then on the working of some powerful engine show signs of life and stir with an uneasy half-vital motion. Frightful must it be, for supremely frightful would be the effect of any human endeavor to mock the stupendous mechanism of the creator of the world. His success would terrify the artist. He would rush away from his odious handiwork horror-stricken. He would hope that, left to itself, the slight spark of life which he had communicated would fade, that this thing, which had received such imperfect animation, would subside into dead matter, and he might sleep in the belief that the silence of the grave would quench forever the transient existence of the hideous corpse which he had looked upon as the cradle of life. He sleeps, but he is awakened. He opens his eyes. Behold, the horrid thing stands at his bedside, opening his curtains and looking on him with yellow, watery, but speculative eyes. I opened mine in terror. The idea so possessed my mind that a thrill of fear ran through me, and I wished to exchange the ghastly image of my fancy for the realities around. I see them still. The very room, the dark parquet, the closed shutters with the moonlight struggling through, and the sense I had that the glassy lake and white Alps were beyond. I could not so easily get rid of my hideous phantom. Still it haunted me. I must try to think of something else. Oh, I recurred to my ghost story. My tiresome, unlucky ghost story. Oh, if I could only contrive one which would frighten my reader as I myself had been frightened that night. Swift as light, and cheering was the idea that broke it upon me. I have found it! What terrified me will terrify others, and I need only describe the specter which had haunted my midnight pillow. On the morrow, I announced that I had thought of a story. I began that day with the words, "It was on a dreary night in November," making only a transcript of the grim terrors of my waking dream. At first I thought, but a few pages, of a short tale, but Shelley urged me to develop the idea at greater length. I certainly did not owe the suggestion of one incident, nor scarcely of one train of feeling, to my husband, and yet, but for this incitement, it would never have taken the form in which it was presented to the world. From this declaration, I must accept the preface. As far as I can recollect, it was entirely written by him. Yeah, and terribly, too. Sorry. And now, once again, I bid my hideous progeny go forth and prosper. I have an affection for it was the offspring of happy days, when death and grief were but words which found no true echo in my heart. Its several pages speak of many a walk, many a drive, and many a conversation when I was not alone, and my companion was one who, in this world, I shall never see more. But this is for myself. My readers have nothing to do with these associations. I will add but one word to the alterations I have made. They are principally those of style. I have changed no portion of the story, nor introduced any new ideas or circumstances. I have mended the language where it was so bald as to interfere with the interest of the narrative, and these changes occur almost exclusively in the beginning of the first volume. Throughout, they are entirely confined to such parts as are mere adjuncts to the story, leaving the core and substance of it untouched. MWS, London, October 15th, 1831. I find this preface very interesting, because it seems like Mary is trying to distance herself from her own progeny, her own book, her own ideas. She talks about how, there was the ghost story challenge, and then she was listening to the conversations between Percy and Lord Byron, and then she had this dream. That was probably a combination of all these things, and this book is just the dream she wrote down, as opposed to maybe the harder truth or the more painful truth that I would conjecture that, yes, it was all of those things, and the undercurrent of her life and the people in it. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in the conclusion video. So join me next week where we're going to dive in with chapter 1.